Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for joining me in this podcast episode. Really appreciate it. How are you today?
Hey, you know what? Thank you for having me. I am doing very well. So looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, same here. Super excited to learn more about your entrepreneurial journey as well. And yeah, I have interviewed a lot of people in their entrepreneurship journey, and like one thing is similar. Like they came across one day, then realized they need to make change in their business or like their career they have. So a lot of people like come from they have no background, entrepreneurial background, like their parents never been an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. They probably come from like a middle-aged families and the professional families. So how was your journey started being an entrepreneur yourself? Is there something like you inherited from your family, or like one day you realize you want to be an entrepreneur, or is it from your childhood?
So what's interesting is my dad he kind of what did the entrepreneurial thing. He started his own, he's a funeral director and he started his own small chain of funeral homes. And I actually swore I never wanted to be an entrepreneur because of growing up around that and just
Yeah.
going, this is not really my jam at all. And so for a long time, I really was convinced that's not at all what I want to do. And so for me, as I continued kind of growing in my career, I grew up in organizations and did a lot of stuff and still am in an organization now. But where my journey kind of intersected was it wasn't enough. I felt like I want to have an impact, but not just in this organization. And I couldn't quite get like, well, so what do I do with that
Yeah.
type of a thing? And so for me, it actually started as just something where I went, I need to go, outside of my usual lanes and just start helping organizations and people outside of that. And then it just kind of expanded. It actually kind of fell together by accident in many ways.
That's interesting. And when you become an entrepreneur, what's the difference like you felt like starting your own business or like working for someone else? Obviously there is like risks involved and a lot of uncertainty in the business world. Like when you get into the business world, like how did your mindset came along?
I think some of the biggest shifts were just the level of accountability in entrepreneurship, both good and bad. The
Right.
volumes turned up to like 11. If you're in an organization, you can make a bit of a risky play. And if it doesn't go well, I mean, there might be some consequences, there might be some fallout.
Yeah.
But even at the very senior level, there's a fair amount of insulation that happens. When you're on your own or when you're making decisions for your company and you take a big bet, you feel the full weight of your mistakes. I mean, there's no cushion underneath it. And I think that was one of the things where for me, especially being on the inside for a long time, you think you're a big risk taker or you're willing to go, and take big things. And then you actually do it on your own and you realize, oh, like I, I went down a path that I'm feeling the full consequences of making a short-sighted decision or doing something that maybe I hadn't thought through quite all the way.
Interesting. And how old are you that time, like when you started your business?
What's that?
How old are you when you started your business?
So I was probably later in life. So for me, I was mid 30s when I did it. And it actually, again, I didn't even know I was starting a business when I started it. I actually started it because it gave me autonomy within my internal organization because there was a lot of dispute between the work I was doing
Mm.
in the industry versus the work I was doing in the company. So I said, well, if I create a company, then I can do it on behalf of that. And I've, separated things.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was actually going to grow into something much bigger than that.
Yeah. And you had like a family that time, like when you started your business. Do you have to have
Yeah.
responsibility? Right.
Yeah. So I've got 7 kids, ages 12 and under.
Wow.
And so when I started this, I think we had 4 at the time when I started. So yeah, I had a family and kids and
Yeah,
the
lots
whole
of
thing.
responsibility that time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. There was a lot.
that's scary, right? Especially if you live in the US, because health insurance have to be provided. If you're in the UK, the healthcare, everything is free. Like if something goes bad, there's a government there to support you. But if you're in the US or any parts of the world, that's like a scary things to be on. If the business doesn't work out, like you're losing a lot of things. That gives you like a lot of pressure when you're starting your own thing.
Yes.
So when you started your business and you decided to go all into that, did you think like a quitting in any point, first year of business?
I did. So yeah, I think, and to be honest, it's still one of those.
Mm,
I don't know that you ever make a decision and say, I've made the final decision and I never,
yeah,
I'm going to go back from that. So yeah, I mean, that's a constant weight that you're kind of weighing is, well, what is the best decision? And when you've got a family of 9,
yeah,
you're constantly evaluating that and going, well, what actually makes the most sense for this? But I think it's one of those both and type situations where I've flexed between, well, in some ways it's been a career strategy to
mm,
say having options and having multifaceted options is better than just kind of banking all on one thing.
yeah. And it's not easy, right? Like I know I didn't have any children. Like it's me and my wife. Like a couple of people is responsibility. I felt like a lot of things when I starting out my business. And just when you started the business, like my first year of business, and I realized how much pressure it goes in. Like when someone is come to your life, like you have to think
Yeah,
about a lot of things, and and a lot of people like quit on that, right? Like first 2 years, they find like you're really struggling and cannot
they
take the
do.
pressure. Yeah,
Well, and I think some of that, and this is something that as I talk to people who are considering the entrepreneurial
mm,
journey now, I think sometimes people have this idea that I've seen two things go wrong. One, they love doing their job. They just want to do their job without a boss.
yeah.
And usually those don't go well because the reality is running a company is different than just doing your job without a boss. That's a very different thing. And so I've seen people go, I'm tired of working under an organization. I'm just going to go consult or I'm going to go do my own thing separately. And you've got to think about the entire organization, not just your task. So I think that's one of the things. But I think one of the other things that I've seen is a lot of people have this idea that, well, I have to figure out my entrepreneurial journey and then quit and then figure it all out versus, well, there's a lot of framework and groundwork you can lay in in a traditional job while you're figuring out, okay, what do I need to do? Because that's one of the things when I was getting started on mine, I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs and they were like, if I could go back,
Yeah.
if I could have done some of this work first, I didn't realize how long it was going to take to build a pipeline and a brand and all this other stuff. And so they thought, well, I'll just jump and then I'll get started and didn't realize they had a long runway ahead of them.
Yeah, and it's like a really really personal thing, right? Every individual is different. Like you come up like
Yeah.
different. Like you having a seven child, I cannot think about that, right? For me, it's like
Yes.
one or two children is perfectly fine, but you managing it really well. And it's like how you design to a lot of people like running a three, four business at the same time, and they've been really successful at it. Some people cannot focus on a one, they get distracted. So
Yes.
when you started your business, how did you minimize your risk when your first year or first couple of years of business? Because obviously you have like lots of responsibility and you have to think about that. Did you have to
Yeah.
like take on like a, if that doesn't work out, I'm gonna go back to my corporate world or
Um, Yeah, I mean, for me, it was walking kind of both lines carefully. In terms of how I mitigated the risk, my wife was integral in this journey in that I tend to think really big and then I want to just go
yeah,
really, really hard. And she was the one that really kept me grounded in saying, like, let's make sure you're nailing something first before you spring off. And because I think that's a big risk. And I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who run into the same thing. They get excited about something and they're like, oh, here's something else I could do. And maybe it's a viable option, but they haven't quite nailed the core yet. And you end up getting really distracted and bouncing around on too many things. So like early on, that was one of the things that she really helped me do because I was like, oh, here's something else I might be able to do. And maybe I could generate a little bit of money doing this. And maybe I could generate a little bit of money doing this. And she's like, right. And maybe you can get to that point. But if it's distracting you from your brand, if it's distracting you from what you're trying to do, you may end up diluting yourself so much that you actually minimize any real possibility that you could do.
yeah, same as my wife. Like I used to do that a lot because in the internet space, like there's so many things you can do. Like I can
Right.
My own drop shipping business. I can run my marketing agency. I can do consulting on the side. And my core value and my core business is just affecting it. She's like, if something is working, why not just focusing on that, double down on it? And time to time, I had to be reminded by my wife. And every year I do that. Sometimes I've seen like someone doing really, really well. One of my friends is doing really well in e-commerce. I want to start another brand. I want to start something like that.
And that's the thing with technology is like
Yeah.
you could be
Yeah.
like, oh,
So much
I could
easier.
start that up.
Yeah. You can just create a website and launch it within like 12 hours and the business is up and running.
Right.
And it's so much easier. But thing is, it's affecting in the long run, like so much
It
energy
is.
goes on your brain because you're probably gonna come up with some creative idea for current business you have. But because of like it spread out everything everywhere, right now you spending 20% in this business, 20% on that communication. It's similar with like a podcasting. A lot of people try to do so many things. They focus on creating podcasting videos, YouTube videos, as long as some shots of TikToks and everything. I don't do that. I just focus on one. Like I just do
Yeah.
podcasting, take a, like a good piece of content, just then my team can snip it out, put it on a TikTok, YouTube, rather than me just creating so many things and just gonna be everywhere at the same time. So
Yeah. Well, and it gets really confusing to the
yeah.
people that you're trying to serve too, because they're like, so
Mm.
what is it you do?
I know it just so many things that's going on, isn't it? So like
Yeah.
forward, like how did you stay focused though in your business? Like I know you mentioned about your wife, but when you're actually doing and getting some momentum, is there something like help you to stay focused on your business, or like did you do some kind of ritual, or like get some help from like a mentor or anything like?
I mean, I've always been a big advocate of having mentors. So I used to have a goal to meet every one of my LinkedIn connections, but that's never going to happen now, with the size of my audience. But I do have core people that I trust. But again, going even back to our conversation about getting distracted with things, I
Yeah,
have certain people for certain things. I know this person is really good at when I'm trying to tackle this challenge. This is the person I go to who helps me think through that because that's their specialty. And if it's something separate, I don't go to that same person, even if maybe they'd be good at it or they'd have good advice, just to help keep me on track because they get to know that specific area of what I'm focused on.
yeah, and that is important as well. Like you need to know like what you're actually doing and what is important for you. Otherwise, like you're gonna get distracted and so many things gonna happen. So
I
running,
remember I remember I
yeah,
talked to one of my mentors early on in the journey,
right.
and I remember I was explaining like what I was thinking and what I want, and he gave me some really hard feedback. He
Mm,
was like, "I have no idea what you're trying to do, and until you can answer that question, I think you need to go back to the drawing board." And I just remember going like, "No, but don't you see all these great ideas?" And I remember him going, "Yeah, I mean they're all great.
but you need to focus on a
You can't
one.
even
Yeah.
articulate to me what it is you're trying to accomplish." And it was tough feedback.
Yeah, that is important, and we tend to do that oftentimes, and that's why like we cannot see the momentum in our business or personal life. It just everything is everywhere and no progress onto that. So like what do you think, like what kind of mistakes you have made? I know like entrepreneurs make mistake every single day. Do you think like you made any kind of
Yeah.
mistakes and you learn from?
Oh, for sure. For sure. So as an example, this was, maybe a couple years in. I had built a fairly sizable brand in my industry, and I saw a problem, especially around COVID,
Yeah,
where the whole event industry kind of vaporized. And given my specialty, I went, I could do that. I'm better. I know what to do this really well. And I had all the connections and I had the way of doing it. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and spin one of these things up and it's going to make sense. And it ties to and in my head, I'd
yeah,
put all the pieces together. And I remember my wife going, I think this is not going to go well. And I was like, but it's this low risk, high reward. Like, let's see what happens. And it did not take very long. And I think this was one of the biggest lessons from it. Several months into planning, I realized this is a mistake.
mm,
Like, this is a mistake. It's taking me off bigger things. I'm distracted with a bunch of this. By the time I actually calculate the return on this investment, it's not good. And I have to say, this is one of the hardest parts I've found with the entrepreneurial thing. but it's been a hard part throughout my professional careers. I had to pull the plug on it. And that's not easy to do when it was your idea, your conception, it made sense and it was all viable. And you look at it and go, I need to take this like old Yeller behind the shed and put it down. Like I need to make the tough decision. I need to communicate with the people who are involved. I just need to say, it's done. It's
So how do
done.
you make a decision right now, like coming from the mistake you have made and you learn from it? Like, do you plan something? Like, do you have any kind of formula you use? So think about like you have a 3, 4 ideas and need to execute one to get well on return on investment. How do you choose like out of them 4 or 3?
I do a lot more small scale experiments
Okay.
to spin it up to see, is there viability behind this?
Mhm.
Is there viability? Can I prove it out on a smaller scale before I really go big? And that was one of the biggest mistakes with this whole event thing is
Yeah.
I didn't go small. I thought I'm going to be, create the biggest thing ever and just went all in. And I thought this is the best way to do it. Go big or go home. Instead of saying, well, why don't you seed a couple ideas, invest, see what happens. And if you get roots and if they spring up, then go big. Don't do that out of the gate.
Yeah, that's really great way to do that. Like then you know this thing is gonna work or not, and if you enjoy it, or is that taking you too much of your time, too much of your energy, and you can find out like you're doing a small task, right? Then you can see
Well,
like
because that's what I
yeah,
would have learned
yeah,
had I done it this way with the big event.
mm,
I would have learned that it had less to do with the viability. It had
right,
more to do with I hated it.
yeah,
Like I hated it. I was like, I hate being in this space. I don't want anything to do with this whatsoever. But now I've created this big monster that I've
mm,
got to walk back from. It's not that it couldn't have been viable. It was just, I'm not enjoying a single bit of this. And I know that's going to come through
yeah,
in the execution of it.
interesting. So yeah, Chris, so what do you advise on someone like us, they're thinking to start their own business or like their starting phase of the business, probably first 1 year, 2 year, and they couldn't find their niche or like choosing what kind of niche they want to go for, like a business type, and they've been distracted on their business. What would be your advice to they can focus and yeah, double down on what they're
Yeah.
really good at?
I mean, I think some of the best advice I would give to people is there's this misperception I think a lot of people have about the entrepreneurship journey that like one day you wake up with this brilliant idea and you just drop everything and just pursue it and it works out.
Mm,
And are there stories like that? I mean, I've talked to lots of entrepreneurs and sometimes that does happen. Legitimately, sometimes that does happen. But that's not the norm. That's
yeah.
not normally how it works out. And so I try and encourage people a lot to say, listen, you don't have to get to a point where you've got your $1 million idea that you're just going to drop everything and chase. Like you can be similar to what I just described and how I continue iterating and innovating. You can do that where you are right now and figure out what is my niche. Building your brand and reputation, you can start doing that regardless of where you are. And that takes a long time. I mean, you
Yeah.
started a podcast, you know what it takes to stand it up. Some people think like, hey, great, if I start a podcast next month, I'm going to have 20,000 listeners a month.
Takes time.
And that's not
Yeah.
reality. That's not how it works. And so it's one of those, sometimes I would just encourage people, hey, think of some of these things that you can start now, today, that can lead you to help get to that point. So when you make the transition, you're not trying to figure it all out at once, because
Mm,
that's where I've seen people just get overwhelmed and then they just burn out way too quick.
yeah, it's so true. And you have to be patient and see like slow progress. And on a day to day, like you have to be super focused. Like, what are you actually spending your time on? Like, all gonna be compounding for like a long term. Like, what you actually worked on past year, 2 years back, the
Yeah.
connection you made, the people you reach out to, the marketing you did, the follow up you did. So everything gonna be, you're gonna see result probably 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and that's what actually happened to my business. We are like a marketing agency and we've been getting clients from like 2 years back. We actually did presentation to. Right now they're coming back, they've seen our posts, they've seen some emails. Right now we are closing deals with them. But that didn't happen like overnight. The
No.
relationship building, my LinkedIn, I had when I started out 6 years back, you only had like 0 followers. This is the first time I started when I launched my business. I started creating. Right now, about 8,000 followers right now, but we see consistently like between 5 to 6 appointments on a weekly basis in inbound leads coming in. But when I started out, even though I'm outbound approach, no one wants to buy from me. No one wants to hear from me. People
No.
are looking at my messages, but they just ignoring me. Right now, I don't have to do that. I'm getting inbound people reaching out to me. They seen me.
Yeah.
But it took like a 5, 6 years time in order to get there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. A lot of people just want that quick return.
Yeah.
And are there things that you can get a quick return on? Yes.
Mm.
But that's not the norm. I remember a lot of my early mentors being like, it's a hockey stick.
Yeah.
You're gonna be waiting for a long time, and it's just gonna be this like, is this ever gonna happen? And then all of a sudden, it's gonna kick in, and you're gonna
Yeah.
see it pick up. But most people don't wait long enough
Not
to
long.
actually see that happen. And there's a lot of that work that you can do. You can get started on it today, and I think
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest things.
That's so true. So, Chris, we are coming to the end of this podcast. It's been a great pleasure having you, and it's a great
Yeah.
conversation as well. So, those who's listening, if anyone wants to learn more about yourself, your business, where's the best place to find you?
You know, I have a website, learningsharks.com, but also I'm extremely active on LinkedIn. So that's most people who engage with me
Yeah,
really end up engaging with me through LinkedIn. It's been a great social platform.
yeah, that's great. So, thank you so much for coming today. I wish you best of luck with your business and personal life, and you have a wonderful day ahead.
All right. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. It's pleasure was mine. So that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. And if you're interested to learn more about Chris, visit his LinkedIn profile. You can find him, Christopher Lind. So until then, I'll talk to you in the next episode. Take care. Bye.